Hey everyone, I'm ANDCosplay and today I'm going to be showing you how to make— why am I shimmying? Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this gravity-defying posable scarf. This feels like a really poor time to say this considering this is not a Fortnite cosplay, but I just got a creator code recently since my last video. It'll be right here below and be sure to use it in the item shop because it helps me continue to create cosplays and put out more tutorials for you guys. I bet I could hide snacks in here. Before we get started, you can find a PDF with my measurements in the description below. If you want your scarf to be one long continuous piece with no seams, you'll need to buy 7 yards of fabric. I saved money by buying $4 package of 2-yard fabric and cutting strips that I then stitched together for the full length. I actually only ended up spending about $10 on this scarf. Here I am just laying out my fabric and getting ready to cut my 7.5 inch wide strips. You're going to need a lot of space to work on this because it's huge. After crawling around on the floor for a while, I had my strips cut out. Then I moved on to repeating the process on my heavyweight interfacing. And this is only half the length. I got a pretty good leg workout doing this. And I almost forgot to cut out my 24-inch long pieces that I used for the ends. If your scarf is one long continuous piece of fabric, you won't need to do this, but I had to stitch all my little strips together. Here's the part where I thought about my choices and realized how freaking long it is. I also had to stitch some of my interfacing together to make that long piece as well. This is the part that took a little bit of time because there's so much fabric, but I laid my scarf pieces on top of the interfacing and then folded it in half so that the interfacing was on the outside and the scarf, the actual outside part, was on the inside because it gets flipped over later after we sew it. Yeah, got a little confusing. We got it. Now begins the long process of stitching all the way down that entire scarf. I stitched around one of the ends and then straight down the whole length. The end result should be about 7 inches wide, so I left myself a pretty hefty seam allowance. Look at this massive fabric, it's insane. I actually went through one of my roll spools, whatever it's called. I went through my gray spool of thread and actually switched over to white, which doesn't matter because you don't see it, but oh my god. Before turning it right side out, I went ahead and cut off some of my seam allowance, especially because there was just a lot of extra. So there's an open end and a stitched end, and what you do is you start to push on the stitched end to flip it the right side out. I had to use a really long piece of dowel wood that I thankfully had just because there was so much to turn inside out. But you just have to start getting it going and pushing it and pulling it, and it's kind of just be gentle with it so you don't rip it. I usually do all I can to avoid ironing fabric at the start of a project and everything, but you really do need to iron this entire thing. As you can see, it's kind of a twisted, floppy mess, but ironing it out will get it looking nice and crisp. Since it's just cotton, I cranked that baby up to high heat and used a lot of steam. Just be careful that if you're using another fabric, you don't, melt it. To finish off the open end, I just tucked in those raw edges and stitched it right on top since it was going to be concealed anyway. Nothing about this project is super challenging, it's just really time consuming, and this is definitely one of those time consuming parts. I'm super lucky I have a dress form where I was able to do this on because doing this on myself was really hard, especially because it's difficult to lift your arms up around your shoulders. I wish I did this sooner because this version you see here ended up being too tight on my shoulders, but start by using a measuring tape to get the diameter, or whatever the term is, measure around your shoulders so you know exactly how wide it should be at the bottom. You really do want it to be pretty snug, especially if you're going to be adding wire like I am later. Just for placement now, I'm just using pins and just tacking it really quickly. I'll go back later to make it look a lot neater and conceal these pins. Once again, rethinking my choices. This is close to complete. I was just super tired that night and left it off here, but you can see that it's starting to actually fit me better. I also got an idea of all the places I need to tack it because I could see where it was gapping.
3 weeks later.
I did that thing where I start a project and pick it up like a month later, but look at that, we're already making good progress. This is when I started to replace my visible pins with safety pins. What I'm doing is I'm going at it from inside to pin the layers to one another. My goal is to only pick up a little bit of the fabric, that way it doesn't peek outside and you don't actually see it. I guess you could also use a thread and needle for this and just tack it, but I kind of wanted something where I'd be able to easily take it apart and something less permanent in case I ever wanted to change the shape or do something else with it. With it all tacked together, I simply just slide it on over my head and push it down onto my shoulders. I would say it's like the top 2 or 3 layers I don't actually have tacked to anything. That's so that I can loosen it up and actually fit it over my head, and then I just arrange it once I have it on. I found that easier, otherwise it's too tight and you would never be able to get your head through. You could pretty much stop here and be good to go with the cosplay, but I wanted to take it one step further and make some end pieces that defy gravity, so stay tuned for that. I'm constructing 2 24-inch long pieces just like I did the rest of the scarf. I'm folding it in half and stitching it together. I turn it right side out and iron it. In order to pose these pieces and make them defy gravity, I'm using 16 gauge jewelry wire. I measure it out to the full length of the pieces, and I'm actually going to fold it in half because I'm going to be twisting the wire onto itself, which makes it a lot stronger. Before I slide the wire into the piece, I put a spot of hot glue on the end of it. That way when I push it in, I can make sure it adheres to the end of the fabric. That way the fabric isn't kind of like getting bunchy around it. It actually will stay in place fairly well. The wire pieces need a pretty sturdy base, otherwise they'll just droop over. Because my scarf is so tight around my shoulders, I just inserted it around the second layer and pushed it all the way down. That way it's wedged right up against my shoulder in the fabric and it'll be able to stand up on its own. To attach these pieces to the scarf, I used my trusty dusty safety pins again. I just really didn't want anything permanent because I may also want to wear the scarf without them on it. And in the end, I had a pretty cool posable scarf. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.